There's something strange about lights in places that shouldn't have any. Headlights in the middle of nowhere. A glow behind a closed door. A glimmer between trees. Too high to be a lantern. Too steady to be a firefly. People always told us not to follow them. They never said what happens if the lights follow you. By the time I decided I was never coming back here, I was already halfway packed. The room I grew up in looked smaller, with the posters curling off the walls and the drawers hanging open. The bed was stripped, the mattress bare, the same faded indent where my body had spent too many nights staring at the ceiling. My suitcase lay open on the floor, clothes folded mostly neatly inside. There was an ugly kind of finality about putting each thing in the case. The more I packed, the less the room felt like mine. That was the point. I could hear the TV down the hall, low and aimless, the news or some rerun. The volume had been kept at that same barely audible level since the year everything went wrong. Loud sounds made my mother jump now. "You almost done?" she called. Her voice strained to sound casual and missed. "Yeah," I lied. "Almost." There wasn't much left to do. Toothbrush, chargers, the notebook I pretended was for writing but mostly used for lists and abandoned sentences. All of it fit. It always surprises you how little space your life takes up when you're trying to escape it. I zipped the suitcase shut. The sound felt louder than it should. My mother appeared in the doorway. She looked older than she had any right to. You expect that in other people's parents, not your own. Her hair was pulled back in a band that had slipped a little, and she was squeezing a mug with both hands like she needed it to stay standing. "You don't have to come back," she said, without introduction. I blinked. "From college? I mean, it's not like I mean here." She cut me off gently. "To this house. To this town. If you don't want to, you don't have to." She said it like a kindness, but there was a tremor under it, something small and selfish. Maybe if I didn't come back, neither would the memories that followed me around here. "I'll visit," I said, because that's the sort of thing you say even when you're not sure it's true. Her eyes flicked to the window behind me, the one that looked out across the road to the tree line. It was dusk, that not quite night where the sky is the color of an old bruise and the world starts deciding what will be visible and what won't. The forest sat at the horizon like it always had, a dark, shaggy wall that made its own weather. "Don't make promises," she said under her breath. "You don't know what you'll be able to keep." I pretended not to hear that. She hovered in the doorway a second longer, like she wanted to come in and hug me or sit on the bed and give some last piece of motherly advice. Instead, she took a small step back. "The bus is at 9, she said. "We should leave in 20. "I know." Her gaze snagged once more on the trees. I saw her jaw tighten, the way it always did when the forest intruded on the edges of her awareness. For a town built by people who logged and hunted for generations, we'd become very good at pretending the woods weren't there. "Don't be late," she said. Then softer, "I'm proud of you, you know." I swallowed. "I know." She left. The TV turned up a notch. The smell of coffee drifted faintly down the hall, mixing with the dust and stale teenage air of my room. I went to the window. The glass was streaked from the last storm. Beyond the road and the ditch and the rough patch of grass, the forest watched, as it always did. There was no trail visible from here, no obvious path, just the gradual thickening of trunks and shadow. When I was little, I used to imagine the forest had a face. The gaps between branches made eyes, the dips in the canopy made a mouth. It sounds childish now, but sometimes, when the wind was still and the light was right, it really did look like something breathing. I told myself I was only glancing. One last look before I left it behind forever. Some habits never fully die. They just go dormant. The longer I stared, the more my skin prickled. At first I thought it was a reflection from a car. We lived near the only road into town. Headlights did strange things when they bounced off windows and metal and wet leaves. But the road was empty. The light was deeper in. A small pale pinprick hovered between two trunks far off the ground. Too high for a phone, too steady to be a firefly. It burned a soft sickle moon white standing out against the thickening blue. I blinked. Another one appeared a little to the left, then a third. They didn't move. They didn't grow brighter or dimmer. They just were. Like someone had punched neat tiny holes in the darkness and let something else shine through. My chest tightened. I could feel the echo of an old terror pressing at the back of my skull, something with the texture of damp leaves and the smell of cold earth. A memory that didn't want to stay buried. My hand moved on its own, fingers lifting toward the glass, as if touching it would somehow mean something. A car horn bleated from the driveway. I jumped. The lights in the forest vanished in the same instant, as if the sound had snuffed them out. I tore my gaze away and grabbed the suitcase handle, knuckles whitening. From the hallway, my mother called. "That'll be Jamie. Come on, let's go." I took one last look over my shoulder. The tree line stared back, blank and black. No lights, no eyes, just trees. I told myself I was leaving this place behind. What I didn't understand yet was that some things don't stay where you leave them. The road into town was smaller than I remembered. I don't know why that surprised me. Everything shrinks when you grow up, especially the places you once thought you'd never escape. The hills were lower, the curves gentler. The landmarks I'd fixated on as a teenager, the rusted-out truck half buried in someone's property, the leaning billboard advertising a diner that had closed before I even left, still stood, decaying at the same slow pace as everything else. The trees, at least, hadn't gotten smaller. They rose along the edges of the highway in dark columns, thinning in places where the land drooped into ditches and thickets, thickening where the soil was good and the shade deep. Past them lay the forest proper, but even the scattered outskirts carried a hint of that older, stranger energy. My rental car's dashboard pinged about the speed limit. The GPS, confused by old roads and spotty signal, had given up a few miles back, entire chunks of the map turning gray. "That's fine," I muttered. "I know the way." My own voice sounded weird in the closed cabin. I had the audio recorder sitting on the passenger seat, not running yet. Just there as a physical reminder of the reason I claimed I was doing this. A manila folder sat under it, stuffed with printed emails and a preliminary proposal with a working title at the top in crisp black letters. Project Nightlights in the Forest. Subject: Rural Folklore and Contemporary Haunt Narratives. It sounded so clean on paper, so academic, the kind of thing granting committees eyed with cautious approval. An investigation into small-town legends about unexplained lights in wooded areas, interview locals, observe the environment, compare accounts, produce a neat little hybrid of documentary and essay. Nothing in the proposal mentioned the fact that I'd grown up in the town I was about to drive into, or that I had once gone missing at the edge of the same forest I now described, with neutral phrases like, site of reported anomalous luminance phenomena. They also didn't know about my best friend. The thought of her made my grip on the steering wheel tighten. I shifted my hands, knuckles popping softly. On the right, a green road sign loomed. "Welcome to Renfield. Population 3,402. I had a distinct memory of that sign listing the population as higher when I was a kid. Maybe that was just nostalgia, or maybe people really had been trickling away all this time, finding other places to build lives that didn't include tree lines and small-town stairs. As I passed the sign, my stomach did a slow, sour roll. Just work, I told myself. This is just work. The recorder didn't argue. Renfield had always been built around the idea that it might become something bigger someday. Wide, hopeful roads, a main strip with too many storefronts for the number of people who actually came through. Lampposts that tried their best to be quaint. As I drove in, I saw all the old bones under the cosmetic changes. The coffee shop that used to be a laundromat. The hardware store that had once been a pharmacy. The big empty lot where the grocery store burned down when I was 12 and never got replaced. I pulled into the small parking lot beside the motel. It sat at the edge of town, backing onto a patch of scrub and half-wild brush that led nowhere in particular. When I was younger, the motel had felt like a portal, the place strangers came from and vanished back into. Now it just looked tired. I killed the engine and sat for a second, watching my own reflection in the windshield. Older, obviously, but with the same shape of face I'd seen in more mirrors than this town could claim. The same tired eyes, just with different reasons this time. "Okay," I said quietly. "You're here. Congratulations." Checking in was quick. The clerk was a man in his 50s with thinning hair and the kind of customer service smile that sits on top of older, more complicated feelings. He squinted at my ID a little longer than necessary. "Arlo," he said. "You related to?" He trailed off, but the implication was clear. The name was familiar here. "Yeah," I said. "That's my mom." He hesitated, balancing politeness against curiosity. Curiosity won by a nose. "Haven't seen you around in a long time," he said. "Back visiting?" Sort of. I slid the credit card back into my wallet. "I'm working on a project about local stories. Folklore." He made a small sound that could have meant anything. "Well," he said, "we've got stories all right." His eyes flicked past me, toward the window, toward the suggestion of distant trees. "If you're after the, lights," he added, lowering his voice a fraction. "You be careful up by the ridge. Some places don't like being bothered." "Places don't have opinions," I said before I could stop myself. He gave me a look that said he disagreed, but was too polite to pick that fight with a paying customer. "If you say so," he replied. "Room 12. Keys." The room was small and smelled faintly of cleaning spray over old cigarette smoke, but it had a bed, a desk, and a view. The curtains, when I tugged them open, revealed a slice of town on one side, and, on the other, the line where houses stopped and trees began. Even from here, the forest looked like it was biding its time. I set my bag down, lined the recorder and notebook up on the desk, and stared out at the tree line until my vision started to go soft at the edges. "You don't live here anymore," I reminded myself. "You get to leave again." The thought helped. A little. "Project log. Day 1. I said into the recorder. My voice had slipped into the slightly performative cadence I used when I wanted to sound like I knew what I was talking about. Detached but intimate. Calm. Analytical. This is Mira Barlow. Working title: Nightlights in the Forest. I've arrived in Renfield, my hometown, to document local folklore surrounding reported unexplained lights in the woods to the north and west of town. The word hometown caught a little on my tongue. I wasn't used to saying it out loud anymore. I continued anyway. The phenomenon, according to preliminary accounts, involves multiple small sources of light observed within the tree line at night. They are described as unmoving, hovering, or hanging at various heights, often in clusters. Witnesses claim the lights do not behave like fireflies, lanterns, or flashlights. They are referred to in some stories as the watching lights or still eyes. I paused, glancing at my handwritten notes. In addition to documenting current beliefs and experiences, I'll be reviewing historical records, local news, and oral histories to trace the evolution of the legend and examine how it interacts with real events. Real events. like a missing person case, like a search that ended without closure. My thumb rubbed absently at a dent in the plastic casing of the recorder. I cleared my throat. Full disclosure, for the eventual edit, I added. I have personal history with this town. And with that forest. I don't remember the details. That's not a poetic statement. I genuinely don't remember. I was a child the night. Something happened. I'm hoping separating what I know, what I think I know, and what this place thinks it knows, will help me figure out what's actually true. There it was. The neat, polished, academic reason. It sounded so much better then. The lights looked at me once and I ran. I don't know what I left behind. I pressed stop. The recorded silence that followed felt thicker than the air. The old trailhead looked almost exactly the same. A narrow, rutted pull-off at the side of the road, half swallowed by weeds. A wooden sign so weathered the carved letters were only just legible. Ridge Trail, use at own risk. Someone had spray-painted a crude smiley face under the warning at some point, but the paint had flaked away in places, leaving the face half erased. I stood beside my car and listened for reasons to turn back. Birds, wind, the faint hiss of a semi-truck a few miles down the highway. Nothing godlike, nothing monstrous, just the regular noises of a place that refused to be impressive on cue. The forest started a few yards from the sign. The trees here were thinner than the deep woods I remembered, a scattered front line of trunks and underbrush, like soldiers guarding a border. Beyond them, the density increased, bark and branch knotting together into a darker wall. I stepped onto the path. The ground felt soft under my shoes, the soil springy from years of fallen needles and leaves. The smell hit me at once. Damp earth, sap, that faint metallic tang of decaying plant matter. It was a smell I had known before I knew words for it. A smell I had once associated with adventure, and then with something else entirely. As I walked, the temperature dropped a degree or two. Sunlight fractured through the canopy, leaving shifting patches of light on the trail like someone had scattered a handful of coins and walked away. I didn't plan to go far, just enough to say I'd been, enough to get establishing shots and atmospheric audio, enough to remind my body that it still knew how to move through this space. My body did not feel reassured. Every few steps my shoulders prickled, a tightness spreading across my back as if I were waiting for something to tap it. I kept glancing to the side, at the tangled undergrowth, at shadows that could have been hollowed logs or could have been anything else. It's just a forest, I told myself. It's just trees and dirt and things that can be measured. I don't know when the first flash of memory came exactly. It was less a vision and more a dislocation, a feeling of stepping forward and finding the past occupying the same space for a split second. One moment I was walking alone, adult weight, adult stride. The next I was smaller, or the world was bigger. The trees loomed differently. My perspective dropped. There was the sense of another hand in mine, fingers sticky with sweat or melted candy. The sound of high, breathless laughter ahead of us. "Come on," a voice said, echoing faintly in my skull. "You're so slow." I blinked hard. The trail snapped back into its present shape. My hand was empty. Wasn't shaking. Not much. I swallowed. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay. That's new." I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trunks, the empty spaces between them. Every shadow looked like it had edges that might tighten if I stared too long. It was too early in the day to see any lights. Full daylight washed the forest in a clear, honest way that left little room for other kinds of illumination. Still, I couldn't help glancing deeper in, between the trees, searching for pinpricks, for confirmation, for accusation. Nothing. Just green and brown and old paths. I forced myself a few steps further, to where the trail curved faintly right and the undergrowth rose in uneven waves. Deeper in, the real forest began, the one from my memories, radials leading away toward the ridge, and somewhere beyond that, the creek and the clearing. My chest pulled tight. Every instinct I had screamed that this was far enough. I stood there a moment longer listening. The wind shifted. Somewhere ahead, out of my line of sight, something creaked softly. A branch settling. A trunk shifting with age. It sounded unreasonably like the forest stretching in its sleep. Later, I said under my breath, though I wasn't sure if I meant to the woods or to myself. I'll come back when. Later. I turned around and walked back faster than I'd come in, the back of my neck prickling the whole time, like the trees were watching me retreat and keeping score. By the time I reached the car, my teeth ached from how hard I'd been clenching my jaw. I told myself the tightness in my chest was just adrenaline. I told myself it had nothing to do with the feeling that something in the forest had recognized me. I picked the diner for the first interview because it felt neutral. Neutral is a lie, of course. There's nothing neutral about the place where half the town's gossip has been poured over coffee for 30 years. But it was public, visible, less likely to swallow me whole. The man I'd arranged to meet was already there when I walked in. He sat in a corner booth, the one with the best view of both the parking lot and the front door. Gray hair, sun-faded skin, shoulders like an old tree trunk. The kind of person the town had started calling Mister before they were technically old enough to deserve it, and the title stuck. "Mr. Harlan?" I asked, hovering by the table. He looked up, eyes narrowing, not unfriendly, just trying to place me. Then his gaze softened in recognition, and I felt the old familiar prickle of being remembered by someone I barely knew. "Thought that was you," he said. "You got your mama's eyes. Sit down." I slid into the opposite seat, setting my recorder as discreetly on the table as possible. "Mind if I record?" I asked. "Audio only, for my notes." He snorted. "If the lights haven't killed me yet, a tape recorder won't." I pressed the button. The little red light blinked to life. "So," I began, slipping into interview mode. "You said, in your email, you've seen the lights in the forest more than once." He added sugar to his coffee in careful, unnecessary increments. "More'n once," he agreed. "Less than I could have, if I was dumber." I waited. He took a sip, watched me over the rim of the mug. "You always were that curious kid," he said. "Always looking out past the road. Didn't surprise me when you left. Surprises me more that you came back." "I came back for work," I said automatically. He made a non-committal sound. "Okay then," he said. "For work. Ask your questions." I hesitated, then glanced at my notes. "When did you first see them?" I asked. "The lights." He leaned back, eyes drifting somewhere past my shoulder, like he was watching the memory play out on the diner wall. "First time?" he said slowly. "Hell, I must have been 20, maybe younger. Out on the ridge with some boys, doing what boys do when they think they're immortal and no one's watching." "Drinking?" I suggested. He huffed a laugh, among other things. He set the mug down carefully. "It was late," he continued. "Stars were out, air clear as glass. We'd walked farther than we meant to. Past where you can hear the road. Trees get real close together up there, like they're conspiring." His fingers drummed a slow rhythm on the table. "We were heading back," he said. or trying to, got turned around. Then we saw them. Little white pinpricks in the dark, hanging between the trunks. Too many to be flashlights. Too high to be anything human. He looked at me then, sharp. You ever see an animal hold perfectly still? He asked. Not frozen, just intent? That's what it felt like the forest had decided to pay attention. A shiver ran down my spine. What did you do? I asked. What you're supposed to, he said. We walked away, slow. Didn't turn our backs on them till we had to. Didn't talk about it with anyone who hadn't been there. His gaze flicked briefly to the recorder. Folks said we were drunk, he added. And we were. But drunk don't make trees grow eyes. I chewed my lip. Do the lights ever move? I asked. Follow people? He shook his head. Not like that, he said. They don't chase you. They don't lure you. They just watch. That's bad enough. The way he said it made my stomach hollow out. What happens if you go closer? I asked before I could stop myself. He went very still. His fingers stopped drumming. Well, he said after a long moment. That depends, doesn't it? On what? He held my gaze, and for the first time in the conversation, something like caution edged his expression. On who you are when you go in, he said. And who you're with. Silence settled between us. Behind it, the diner clattered on plates, conversations, the hiss of the grill. He leaned forward, dropping his voice. Look, he said. You want to put stories on a screen, that's your business. But those lights aren't a story to everyone. They're what's left of some things. My throat felt tight. Some things, I repeated. He nodded. You were there that night, he said quietly, when the girl went missing. The recorder on the table might as well have been a bomb. Yes, I said, because lying felt pointless. I was. And you say you don't remember, he said. I don't, I replied, the words coming out sharper than intended. I've tried. His gaze softened. Not pity exactly, but something adjacent. Sometimes, the forest remembers for you, he said. Whether you want it to or not. The town hall archive smelled like paper and resignation. The clerk, a woman with a tight bun and looser boundaries, had taken one look at my request for old police reports or newspaper clippings regarding unexplained forest phenomena, and decided she didn't want to deal with it more than she had to. There's a cabinet for that stuff, she said, waving vaguely. Last one on the right. The weird one. The weird one, I repeated. She shrugged. Ghost stories, disappearances, Bigfoot, whatever. People get fixated. File it, forget it, move on. The cabinet was metal and dented, its handles slightly bent from being yanked too hard over the years. A piece of tape labeled Missed Incidents had been slapped across the top drawer in faded marker. Inside, everything was only approximately organized. Photocopies of old newspaper articles, handwritten notes, official forms with too many lines left blank. There were manila folders labeled things like hunter reports and vandalism, cemetery, and, in darker ink, missing child, 1999. My fingers hovered over that last one for a moment before pulling it out. The folder was thinner than it felt like it should be. Inside, a photocopy of a school photo, a grainy news clipping, a search grid map with scribbled circles, an incident report. I forced myself to look at the photo first. She was younger than my memory of her. Or maybe I had been older in my mind's version, taller beside her. Round face, eyes that couldn't decide between mischief and defiance, hair pulled back in a ponytail that already looked like it was halfway to escaping. The kind of smile that said she knew she was being watched and was performing for the camera anyway. Under the picture, in neat typed letters, Hannah Miles, age 10. My best friend. My chest constricted. I moved to the news clipping. Local girl missing. Community search continues. The article was all the usual lines. Concerned residents, last seen near authorities, urge anyone with information. I scanned for details that might feel new, but they all tasted like something I'd swallowed long ago and tried to forget. Last seen near the edge of the North Ridge Forest, believed to have been playing with a friend. Friend's name withheld due to age. My fingertips stilled on that line, a bitter little laugh caught in my throat. I flipped to the incident report. The form was clinical. Time, 21:37. Location, North Ridge. Reporting officer, K. Harlan. Mr. Harlan. Under found individual, my name, Mira Barlow, age 10, located at Eastern Tree Line, alone. Condition cold, dirty, unresponsive. Remarks, subject would not answer questions beyond saying they're still watching. The room tilted slightly. I set the paper down before I crumpled it. I stared at that handwritten note, at the officer's scrawled words echoing something my mouth had apparently said while my brain checked out. They're still watching. I had said that, about what? About who? The fluorescent light above me flickered. Once, twice. I closed the folder slowly and exhaled through my teeth. The forest remembers for you, Mr. Harlan had said. I wasn't sure I wanted to know what else it had filed away. I told myself I was going to my mother's house to check in, make sure she was okay, reassure her that I hadn't immediately sprinted into the woods and disappeared again. In reality, I think I was hoping the walls might talk. The house hadn't changed much. Same peeling paint, same cluster of potted plants on the porch stubbornly surviving despite inconsistent care. The air inside carried the same mix of laundry detergent, coffee, and something older, like the memory of cigarette smoke that hadn't fully forgiven us for quitting. Doors open, my mother called from the living room when I knocked anyway out of habit. She sat on the couch with a blanket over her legs and the TV remote in one hand, even though the screen was muted. The news scrolled words silently across people's mouths. "You look tired," she said by way of greeting. "So do you," I replied. We smiled at each other, a little brittle. I sat in the armchair opposite her, sinking into the familiar sag of old cushions. The living room window behind her framed once again the tree line. Even from here, I could see the suggestion of trunks, the line where town stopped pretending the forest didn't exist. "How's the motel?" she asked. "Fine," I said. "Smells like every motel I've ever stayed in." "That bad, huh?" We both chuckled weakly. She glanced at the recorder peeking out of my bag. "You started your project?" she asked. "Yeah." I rubbed my palms against my jeans, suddenly conscious of how they'd started to sweat. Talking to people. Looking at records. Her gaze sharpened. "What kind of records?" she asked. "Just old reports. Articles." I tried to keep my tone light. About the lights. About the forest. "And about Hannah," she said. It wasn't a question. My mouth went dry. Her file is with all the rest, I said after a second. I found it. She inhaled slowly, the lines around her eyes deepening. I didn't want you to come back and dig that up, she said quietly. I bristled, even as guilt twisted in my gut. I'm not digging it up, I said. It's already there. I'm just trying to understand what happened. People have stories. The town has made it into this half legend, half cautionary tale. It was a cautionary tale before it was a legend, she said. We told you kids not to go into those woods. She looked at me, then, fully, really looked. And you went anyway, she added. I flinched. I don't remember that night, I said, the familiar defense rising by reflex. I remember going to bed. I remember nothing. Then I remember being back here, and everyone looking at me like I'd done something unforgivable. My mother's jaw clenched. You were found at the edge of the trees, she said, covered in dirt, shoes gone. You wouldn't talk for days. Do you know what it's like, watching your child stare past you like you're not there? I had never asked her that, never wanted to. I was 10, I said, but it came out small. She shook her head, eyes wet. You were there, she whispered, with her, and you came back alone. The words sat between us like a third person. I swallowed hard. I'm trying to find out what happened, I said. To her, to me, to all of it. At what cost? She asked. You think the forest likes being poked? You think those lights are just going to sit pretty for your camera? I didn't have an answer. She turned back toward the muted TV, where smiling strangers mouthed tragedies I didn't need to hear. If you're going to do this, she said, just don't lie to yourself about why. I glanced out the window, at the tree line, at the dark gap between one pair of trunks that seemed just a shade deeper than the rest. I won't, I said, and for the first time, I wasn't entirely sure that was true. The first time I saw the lights clearly, I wasn't in the forest. I was in the motel, standing at the window in my socks and a t-shirt, staring at the line where the town's patchy backyards ended and the trees began. It was past midnight. The highway had gone mostly quiet. A single street lamp in the parking lot cast a cone of sickly yellow onto the asphalt, making moths look like ghosts of smaller, more frantic things. I had meant to review my recordings. Instead, I found my eyes drifting back to the glass, over and over, like I was waiting for something. I didn't know what. At first, I thought it was a trick of the reflection. There was a cluster of pale spots near the base of the hill beyond the last house, a scattering of points that looked like someone had left a string of holiday lights tangled on a fence. But there was no fence there. I stepped closer to the window. The spots resolved into distinct points, not warm like incandescent bulbs, not blue like LEDs. A cold, steady white, somewhere between moonlight and the blank of a computer screen when it first wakes up. They were too far apart to be on a single string. Some hung higher than others, hovering at different heights among the first line of trees. Too precise to be random gaps. They did not move. Not a flicker, not a bob. They just watched. I held my breath without meaning to. As my eyes adjusted, I realized there were more of them. Further in, layers upon layers of tiny, unmoving glows, like someone had pinned an alternate constellation to the interior of the forest. My heart climbed into my throat. The room behind me felt suddenly thin, like flimsy cardboard stood up against something much older and less impressed by walls. I told myself it could be houses beyond the hill, porch lights softened by distance, and leaves. Then, one of the points blinked out. Not faded, not shifted, just gone. A moment later, another one appeared a few feet to the side, at the same height, like something had turned its head. Every hair on my body stood up. The points didn't drift. They didn't swing. They just shifted location with the eerie precision of eyes changing their focus. They weren't searching. They were settling. On me. I couldn't hear the forest from this distance, but I felt it the way you feel a hand on the back of your neck, without seeing it. For a long, breathless span of seconds, I stood there and stared back. Then, somewhere in the room, the AC unit kicked on with a grating rattle. I jumped. When I looked back at the trees, the lights were gone. The dark between the trunks seemed thicker in their absence, like empty eye sockets. I stepped back from the window slowly, my heart still hammering. "Don't chase you," Mr. Harlan had said. "Don't lure you. They just watch." He was wrong about one thing, I thought, pressing my palms against the cool laminate of the desk to steady myself. They do more than watch. They remember. I met Kara at the only cafe the town had bothered to keep open, mostly because the owner's daughter posted viral latte art on Instagram once, and Renfield clung to the notoriety for dear life. She saw me first. "Mira?" she asked, sounding like she didn't fully believe it. "Yeah," I said, managing an awkward little wave. "Hey." We hadn't been friends exactly, more like classmates who had briefly sat together in sixth grade until social gravity pulled us into different orbits. But she was Hannah's cousin. That meant something. She sat across from me, wrapped both hands around her mug, and stared for a long second. "You look the same," she said. "Older, but the same." "You too," I lied politely. We eased into the interview. At first it was soft questions, what she remembered of that summer, whether her family still talked about it, the general folklore around the lights. But then she said something I didn't expect. "You know," she murmured, "people said you saw them first." My breath hitched. "Saw what first?" "The lights." She leaned in. "Kids talked. Adults talked more. Some said the lights followed you. Others said you followed them." "I don't remember," I said automatically. She studied me. Really studied me. "Mira?" Her voice lowered. "Do you really not remember? Or do you not want to?" Something inside my chest tightened like a hand closing around it. "I was 10, I said. "Something happened and my brain protected me from it." "Or the forest did," she said softly. "You ever think of that?" I sat back. The cafe noise blurred into a dull smear. She wasn't teasing. She wasn't trying to scare me. She genuinely believed it. And the worst part was, a small, horrified part of me did too. Before I could form a reply, the lights in the cafe flickered. Kara's eyes widened. "That happens," she whispered, "whenever someone talks about that night." I shut the recorder off. I didn't want that sound preserved. The rain was thin, almost mist-like, when I drove back to the motel. Not enough to obscure the road, just enough to make everything shine with a wet, black sheen. The forest ran along the right side of the road. I tried not to look. Failed. Between the trees, faint through the curtain of rain, were the lights. Dozens of them, maybe more, perfectly still, perfectly spaced, watching. My heartbeat picked up. I pressed a little harder on the gas, but the lights didn't fall behind. They stayed exactly parallel to my car, as though the forest were moving with me. No, not with me. Tracking me. My breath fogged the windshield from the inside. I cracked the window for air and immediately regretted it. The dampness smelled wrong. Older than rain, older than the trees themselves. A sharp blink of brightness flashed in the cluster, one light winking out and reappearing 10 feet higher, like an eye widening. I slammed the window shut. For several long seconds, I drove without breathing. When I finally forced myself to look again, the lights were gone. Only darkness remained. Back in the motel, I reviewed the day's interviews. The audio had problems. Whenever someone mentioned the forest, a low hum appeared under the voice, subtle and steady, like bass notes from a speaker I couldn't see. Whenever someone said Hannah's name, the hum warped into a sharp, electric crackle. And in one part, during Kara's whispered question, "Do you not want to remember?" there was something behind her voice. Another whisper, layered under mine. I replayed the clip. "Kara, do you not want to remember?" Me, faintly, "Don't." But I hadn't spoken then. I remembered my mouth being closed, my throat tight, my body completely still. I replayed it again and again, until I nearly convinced myself it was static. But on the last listen, I heard something else. A child, barely audible, whispering my name. I fell asleep on top of the blankets, recorder still beside me. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up standing at the motel window. I had no memory of getting there. Outside, the forest edge was pitch black. No lights tonight, no faint glimmers, but my feet were cold, wet, mud drying against the tile. I looked down. My socks were stained with dirt and pine needles. My heartbeat climbed into my throat. Had I gone outside, sleepwalking? Or a brief, unbearable flash cut through my mind. 2 small beams of flashlight circling the dark. A child's laughter. A hand slipping from mine. A voice whispering, "Come on, don't be scared." I grabbed the desk for balance until the present returned. It took an hour for my breathing to settle, even longer to fall back asleep. My mother didn't act surprised when I knocked the next morning. She just stepped aside and let me in, like she'd been expecting the visit. "You look messed up," she said. "Did you know I sleepwalk?" I asked. "No," she said carefully, "but I know when you're running from something." I sat at the kitchen table, palms flat on the wood. "Tell me everything," I said. "I won't leave until you do." Her face tightened in that painful way people's faces tighten when they're about to give back a memory they never wanted. "You were found at the tree line," she said. "Shoes gone. Your clothes soaked. You were staring straight into the forest like you were waiting for someone to walk out." My pulse stuttered. "You wouldn't speak," she continued. "Not to me, not to the police. You just kept whispering something." "What?" I asked. Her eyes lifted to mine. "They're still watching." The room tilted. "You know what the part that haunted me was?" she whispered. I didn't answer. "You said it like you weren't scared of them," she said. "Like you missed them." My whole body went cold. "What about Hannah?" I asked. "What happened to her?" My mother's face cracked. Just a hairline fracture, but enough. We don't know, she said. We never knew. But the way she said it told me there was something deeper. Something she feared knowing. Her house had a crawl space I hadn't entered since childhood. A low, musty gap behind a panel in the hallway closet. I don't know what made me open it. Instinct. Compulsion. Something older. Inside was a dusty cardboard box with my name on the top. Inside that box was a notebook. My handwriting. Age 10. Shaky, uneven. Most of the pages were drawings. Clusters of lights floating between tall, spindly trunks. Circles of dots connected by scribbled lines. A figure. A small child standing among them. On one page, written in childish scrawl, "They don't move until you do." Another, "They like when you look back." Another, "Hannah says they talk but only inside." My breath shuddered out of me. Near the end of the notebook, several pages had been torn out entirely. Ripped violently, not carefully removed. Someone, possibly me, had tried to erase something. But memory is not paper. It stains. It didn't return in one clean piece. It came in flashes. Heat of a summer night. Sweat on my palms. Hannah tugging at my wrist, saying, "Come on, just a little further. They're supposed to be brightest tonight." Us sneaking out. Laughing too loudly. The forest swallowing the sound whole. 2 flashlights. Hours cutting through the dark. The trees crowding around us like they wanted to hear everything we said. Then, the clearing. Hundreds of lights hanging at different heights. Perfect. Still. Waiting. I remembered stepping closer. Hannah stepping faster. I remembered the way the lights shifted. Slow and synchronized. Like a field of tiny faces turning toward us. I remembered the sound. Not sound exactly, but pressure. Like someone pushing cold fingers into both temples. I remembered Hannah whispering, "Do you hear them? They're asking us things." I remembered pulling her hand. I remembered her pulling back. I remembered the lights brightening, almost imperceptibly, but enough to feel them inside my teeth. I remembered panic. Turning, running, letting go, leaving her, leaving her. I didn't remember her screaming. I didn't remember her chasing me. I didn't remember anything after the moment I chose myself. I went back to the trail at dusk. The sky pale, the air electric. The clearing was there, exactly as it had been in my memory. Except now, the lights were already present, a full constellation of them, arranged like an audience waiting for the show to begin. When I stepped in, they adjusted, just slightly, like someone settling in their seat. There was a space between 2 lights that felt familiar, like the shape of someone who used to stand there, someone who no longer did. My breath trembled. "They're not spirits," I whispered. "They're not aliens. They're not anything I can categorize." The air tightened, an approval or correction I couldn't tell. "They're memories," I whispered. "They're witnesses." And they had been waiting for me to remember what I'd done. The clearing pulsed faintly as I stepped closer. "I'm sorry," I said. My voice sounded too small. I was a child. I tried. I was scared. The lights didn't dim or brighten. They simply listened. And in the silence between them, I felt something. Not Hannah, not exactly, but the space where she had been. Her last emotion wasn't terror, it was confusion. And then a sudden, agonizing loneliness. My knees buckled. Understanding washed over me. The forest didn't want to hurt me. It wanted to correct the story. It wanted me to carry the truth. Memory is currency. And I had been in debt for years. I stepped into the center of the clearing, where she had stood. The lights raced, not physically, but perceptually. Then lowered. I closed my eyes, and for a few seconds, I felt everything. Hannah's small hand letting go. My feet turning away. The forest swallowing her. The lights drawing in. A knowledge older than the world decided. This one will stay. This one will remember. And then, release. When I opened my eyes, the lights were fading. Not disappearing, just withdrawing deeper into the trees. Not because I wasn't interesting anymore, but because my part of the story was finally told. Dawn broke pale and soft as I reached town again. People stared. I must have looked like I'd walked through a storm made only for me. At home, I opened the recorder. My voice didn't tremble when I spoke. Nightlights in the forest. Final entry. They are not monsters. They are not gods. They are what remains when a story refuses to die. I visited Hannah's family. I told them everything. Not because they needed answers, but because I owed them the truth. That night, I stood at the motel window and watched the tree line. One single light appeared. Just one. Not accusing, just acknowledging. A quiet, impossible forgiveness. I whispered thank you into the glass. The light blinked once, then vanished. Thank you for stepping into the forest with me tonight. Stories like this stay alive because of people like you who listen, wonder, and carry them a little farther. If you enjoyed this journey, leave a like, share it with someone who loves quiet, haunting places, and feel free to return anytime. Until our next story, stay safe, stay curious, and if you ever see lights watching from the trees, remember to look back.